You call me a saint, but you know I'm a stranger, all willing and able to do what you want. You think I'm a thinker, but I'm just a singer, all messy and pretty, just making believe. Boy, I'm falling, I'm falling, I'm falling, I'm falling, I'm falling down to obscurity. Don't let me ever be this alone. I'm falling, I'm falling, I'm falling, I'm falling, I'm falling.
Hi, my name's Sara Jade and welcome to my channel where we talk about true crime, unsolved cases and more. If you're interested in true crime, be sure to like, subscribe and hit that bell. So today we're going to be talking about the Chris Watts case. This case blew up in 2018 as no one could understand how a loving husband could just turn into a cold-blooded murderer. It sent shivers down the community as there was no warning and it could quite possibly happen to anyone. So just a quick content warning before we begin. In this case, we will be talking about the death of 2 children. So if this is something you can't watch, you can switch off now and I'll see you in the next video. Shanann Watts was born on January 10th, 1984 in North Carolina. She was the oldest daughter of Frank and Sandy Ruskin and also had a younger brother called Frank. She was described as a vibrant, outgoing woman who worked hard for her family. When she was 20, she was diagnosed with lupus and was going through a dark stage in her life when she received a friend request from Chris Watts. Chris Watts was also born in North Carolina on May 16, 1985. He had sent Shanann a friend request as they had mutual friends on Facebook, and before long they were dating. In November 2012, they got married and they moved to Frederick, Colorado to set up their family home. Their first daughter Bella was born in December 2013 and she was described as calm, caring, smart and a motherly figure. Their second daughter was born a year later, July 17, 2015, but she was the complete opposite. She was a rambunctious wild child. Shanann started working for a multi-level marketing company called Level. They used to sell multivitamin patches and she would document her life and experiences and put them on her social media. This depicted a quite happy social life and a loving family with a husband that was very content on showing their family life. He seemed very shy, but he didn't seem like he was that bothered about her posting all her pictures. 3 months before the incident, Shanann found out she was pregnant and she decided to do a little video on Facebook to show all her friends and surprise Chris with the news. She put a little t-shirt on and said, "We did it again," and started to record the video. Chris comes into the house and he's very happy, he's saying all the right words. However, the way he's acting doesn't seem very real. All his friends put this down to him being shy and saying that, everyone's different, everyone acts differently when they find out the news, and it probably was just a bit of shock to him that it was on video as well and he didn't know how to act. For the summer holidays, Shanann decided to take the kids back down to her hometown to see her family and Chris's family. They were going to spend 6 weeks out there, and on the last week, Chris was going to come along and spend some family time with them as he was at home working. Well, they were on their trips for a couple of weeks, and Shanann realised that Chris was quite distant with her. He wasn't answering her calls, he wasn't calling the children even, and she would go like a whole day without hearing him. So she started to push back and ask him what was going on. What was he feeling? And he was just like, "I'm fine, it's nothing." She put it down to an argument that she had had with his mum just a couple of weeks before. So a couple of weeks before, Shanann had got in an argument with Chris's mum. They'd gone round to her house for dinner and she'd noticed that they had some ice cream there that Cece couldn't have. She was allergic to quite a few things and she even had an EpiPen that she used to carry around with her. She told them, please don't give her any of that ice cream. However, later in the evening, she came back into the kitchen and saw that Cece was eating the ice cream. Obviously, she was very upset about it, and there was an argument between her and Chris's mum. And it came to the point that Shanann was asked to leave, and they didn't see them for the rest of the holiday. They even had a little party for Cece while they were there, and the grandparents didn't turn up. The only other time that Chris had been really funny with her was at their wedding, and this was also because she had had an argument with Chris's mum, and they actually didn't come to their wedding. Things got even worse when Chris turned up a week later. He was very cold and distant with her, would only peck her on the cheek and really wouldn't talk to her very much. She started to push back at him and ask him what was wrong, and he just wouldn't give her anything and said he's fine, he just didn't want to talk about it here. Eventually they were able to talk, and she confided in her friends that Chris had actually said to her that he didn't want the other baby. He thought that having Cece and Bella was just enough and he didn't want another child. When they got home a week later, things got even worse, and Chris eventually sat Shanann down and said to her that he didn't love her anymore in the way he used to. She couldn't understand it. 6 weeks ago, he was all over her, And now he was very cold and distant and didn't want to be in a relationship with her anymore. She just couldn't understand. But she wasn't ready to give it up and she wanted to fight for her relationship. She confided in her friend. She was researching on how to improve herself and also how to improve her marriage. However, when she was looking up information on how to save their marriage, Chris was actually looking up of when to say I love you in a new relationship. It turned out that Chris had actually started an affair with one of his co-workers, Nicola Kessinger. They had met at work in the beginning of June and spent the whole summer going on dates, going to the sand dunes together and just enjoying dating life when his family were in North Carolina. He told her that he was getting a divorce and that he was just living in the basement just while they sorted that stuff out with the kids, and she believed him. A couple of weeks later, Shanann was going on a work date with a couple of her friends. They were going to spend the weekend away and Chris was going to look after the children. But while she was there, she got a credit card notification to say that they had spent about $90 at a bar and grill. She was very confused about this because she knew Chris was going to spend one evening going out for drinks on his own and watching the football. However, the price of the meal was just too expensive and she thought, this can't be right. So she spoke to him and said, did you go with someone else? Are you having an affair? What is going on? And he was like, no, nothing. I just bought a couple of more drinks. Shanann arrived home from her trip on the early hours of August 13th. Her flight had been delayed, so she didn't get back until the early hours of the morning. One of her friends that she'd gone on the trip with drove her back home and saw her into her house. Little did she know that was the last time she'd ever see her. The next morning, her friend Nicole Atkins decided to give her a call. She was quite worried about her. She hadn't been the same on the trip as her usual bubbly self, and she just wanted to check she was okay. She also had a doctor's appointment to check out the baby, and she wanted to see how that was going. However, Shanann didn't answer any of her calls or any of her messages, which is really weird for Shanann because she was always on Facebook, she was always messaging her friends every morning, and she didn't usually go a day without speaking to them. Nicole decided to check the doctors to see if she'd been there and seen how everything went. But when she got there, they told her that she hadn't turned up for her appointment. At this point, Nicole started to get a little bit worried about her, as this was unlike Shanann, so she decided to take her son and go and check out her house. When they arrived at the house, they were knocking on the doors and on the windows and having a look to see if they could see Shanann, but they could see no sign of her. They actually knew the code to her front door, so they tried to get in. However, there was a latch at the top that was locked, which was very strange because they usually only had that to stop the kids coming out the door when they were inside the house. So she decided to give Chris a call and just see if she knew where she was. She rang Chris. Chris was like, it's fine. She went to see a friend. She told me this morning she was going out, so it'd be fine. I'll come back now and we can have a look to see where she is. Don't worry about calling the police or anything. I'm sure it's fine. However, Nicole was getting quite worried about her, hadn't heard from her at all, and just was very out of her character. So she decided to call the police anyway. Police arrived at the house before Chris, and they also tried to knock on the door, knock on the windows, and look around the side of the house to see if they can find them. They can't go into the house because they don't have permission from the owner to go in, and everything could be okay.
Hi.
Here, Nicole?
Yes.
Okay. What's going on?
So, my friend, we were out of town for a business trip this weekend.
Right.
And I dropped her off at 2 o'clock this morning. She's 15 weeks pregnant. She wasn't feeling well. And she had a doctor's appointment this morning at 9. And I told her to let me know if she needed me to take her. She's got 2 little girls. And she was very distraught over the weekend, wasn't eating normally or drinking. And we kept trying to force it on her because she's pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband and her supposedly are separating. But she didn't know this. She thought they were just having issues. He disclosed that to me today.
Okay.
Because I called him and I was like, have you talked or heard from Shanann since she left for work this morning? Because I can't get a hold of her. I've called, I've texted. Her car's in the garage. Her shoes she wears every single day right in the front door.
She only has one vehicle?
No, they only have the one vehicle and a work truck.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. There's not a...
The girls went on a play date, but they're 4 and 2. She went on a play date. Why would she be in a car? They're both in car seats.
Chris suddenly turns up at the house and lets them in. He goes through the garage and then opens the front door for them. They all go through the house and start to check all the rooms to see if they can find anyone. There's nothing that seems to be missing except 2 of the girls' blankets from their bedrooms. Everything seems to be in place, except for in their bedroom. The bed had been stripped and all their bedding had been thrown onto the floor in a pile. Nicole starts to get worried when she finds a handbag in the kitchen and it's got her keys inside and their medication. It also has Cece's EpiPen. They know that she'd never leave the house without it. Then upstairs they find her mobile, and that worries them even more because that's her lifeline. Chris, during this time, seems very calm and collected and doesn't seem like a father who's looking for his children or worried about where they are. He then goes into his bedroom and comes out with her wedding ring. Although this seems strange and it looks like she might have left them, it seems weird that she'd leave everything else.
Oh. Well, friends she would be hanging out with? I know, I guess her parents are out of state.
Across country, North Carolina.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's not happening. All the girls' blankets are gone. Their blanket they sleep with, they don't leave anywhere with them.
Good. Nothing else appears to be missing though, just stuff you'd take for a quick trip. Does she work?
Yeah, she works from home.
Oh, from home?
She works in the Assisted Lifeline.
The police then get a breakthrough as a neighbour knocks on the door and says we've got some footage of our outside camera that actually looked onto their property and it may be able to show Shanann and the girls have left. So the police go round there with Chris to go and view this footage. So they go through all the videos to see if they can see anything of Shanann and the girls leaving the house. However, all they see is footage of Chris backing his car up into the drive about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, which is very strange as Chris usually parks his van just outside on the road. During this time, Chris is acting very strange. He's moving around a lot, he's swaying side to side and putting his hand through his hair. This is all signs of anxiety. And it's very strange that while they're watching the footage, Chris is actually walking around the room and not looking at the footage. I mean, if your family were lost and you were trying to look for them, you'd be watching that footage every single second. The only time that he actually looks at the footage and starts to talk is when they see his car pull up. He explains that there'd been a lot of theft in the area and he wanted to put his stuff inside, so he'd driven up to park near his house so he could load everything in and out of his truck.
This is him at 517.
You park out there on the side and like everything. There's a lung and everything out there, all the tools that have to bring in. What else can I do with this?
My detective just showed up. So he'll probably want to talk to you. He'd probably, like I said, he might have you call at the bank and see if there's any kind of activity.
Because if there was any sort of action out
I know
there,
his camera's
I would have got it.
like
Right.
we had issues the other week when people were stealing stuff out of like garages and stuff like that. And I have park control
I had
right
it
here.
parked right here.
Yeah.
So you
Someone,
can see if
I can see
anything
where
happened.
someone tried to jimmy with a flathead screwdriver over there. And it was like,
24 hours later and there's still no sign of Shanann and the girls, and the police decide to bring cadaver dogs into the house so they can smell the scent of the girls. During this time, Chris also does some interviews in front of the house. However, these interviews don't go down too well. He doesn't come across as a loving father that's lost his children. He just seems quite cold, quite collected. He's saying all the right words. However, his movements and the way he's acting is very strange and doesn't seem like a loving husband who's worried about where his wife and his 2 children are. There's another break in the case when Chris's girlfriend actually comes forward and goes to the police. She wants to give her side of the story and she wants to help find these 2 children. She didn't know that Shanann was pregnant and she just found out through the media, and she wanted to make sure that she gave everything over to help find them. At this point, the police start to get suspicious of Chris. He's got a hidden girlfriend, his behaviour is very strange, and he doesn't seem like someone that's very upset about his family being missing. So they decide to bring him in for some questioning and a polygraph. Chris is quite happy to come into the police station, give his side of the story and do a polygraph. They sit him down and he goes through all the events of the day and the night before, and he tells them he doesn't know where they are. He's very surprised that they're missing and nothing happened. They had a slight argument the night before, but everything was okay and he didn't know where they were. They then decide to give him a polygraph, and the lady comes into the room and sits him down and asks him questions. She actually says to him, at the end of this interview, both of us will know the truth. We clear you of any wrongdoing because you wouldn't do this test if you were lying. So they go through all the questions and then she goes out the room. They come back into the room to explain to Chris that he's actually failed the polygraph test and that they're going to track his car through his GPS to find out where he's going.
So, it was completely clear that you were not honest during the testing. I think you already know that. You did not pass the polygraph test.
Right.
Okay. So now we need to talk about what actually happened. I feel like you're probably ready to do that.
I didn't lie to you on that polygraph, I promise. Chris, I'm messed up.
At this point, he breaks down. He tells them all about the affair and says that he'd been lying to cover his girlfriend. However, they then tell him that they know all about the affair, that she'd actually come in the next day and told them everything, and he hadn't been lying on the exam because they didn't ask anything about his girlfriend, so that wouldn't have made him fail the test. They continue to question Chris and even suggest at one point that maybe Shanann was involved, maybe she'd hurt the children and then he'd covered it up. This is a common practice by the police to try and get them to confess. At this point, Chris breaks down and asks to see his father. His father had flown in to come and help him, and usually the police wouldn't allow this, but at this point they did. So Chris's father comes in and speaks to him. He tries to ask him what has happened, where the girls are, and does he know any information. He finally starts to confess to his father what happened. He admits to killing Shanann. However, in a surprising twist of events, he said he only killed her in a fit of rage as he'd heard a commotion upstairs, and when he went up there, Shanann was strangling one of the girls. He had flipped out and strangled her and then didn't know what to do, so he decided to get rid of the bodies.
I freaked out. I didn't know nothing else to do. Didn't know what to do. So she killed her sister and choked her to death. You lost it and choke her or mommy. This is rage. I
The police then decide to question him further, just to get all the information and also to see if he'd actually tell the truth. They didn't believe that Shanann had anything to do with it, and they wanted Chris to confess. However, Chris was not going to say anything. He was happy for them to go to the press and tell them Shanann had killed the girls. As they couldn't get any further with Chris, they decided to concentrate on finding Shanann's body and the girls. So they brought a map out to him and asked him to pinpoint on the map where he had buried the girls. He then crosses on the map the area that Shanann's body was buried. He had gone to the oil rig in the morning. However, instead of just going there to check it, he'd actually gone there to dump the bodies. He'd put Shanann in a shallow grave at the bottom of the field, and the girls he pinpointed and crossed them inside the oil tanks. Chris would have to carry them up these steep stairs and squeeze them through this 9-inch hole, and no one could fathom how he could have done that. He was then arrested for 3 counts of murder, and the news was released to the press.
Chris, come stand up for me. I'm going to have you face that wall over there. Yep, just face it. Lift up your hands. Okay, come face this wall. Okay, go and face me. Okay, you don't have anything on you, right? Okay, nothing in your pockets? Okay, go and face that other wall behind you. I'm just going to search you real quick. Search your legs. Further. Okay, turn around and face me. No earrings, necklaces, anything like that? Okay. Let's walk out this way. Go straight. Go out that door to your left. Seat.
His family were devastated. However, they released Chris's version of the events that Shanann had killed the girls, so there was a big uproar. The family received lots of abuse, even though the police weren't 100% sure that Chris was telling the truth. Chris received 9 felony counts, 5 for first-degree murder, 1 for the unlawful termination of a pregnancy, which was actually a little boy called Nico, and 3 counts of tampering with a body. The evidence started to mount against Chris when the autopsies come back, and it was revealed that the children weren't strangled, they were smothered. To avoid the death penalty, Chris decided to plead guilty to all accounts and received life in prison. 4 months later, Chris asked to see the original police that investigated him, and he wanted to tell them the whole truth of what happened. He said that he spent his whole life just going with the flow, and over time he started to get resentment towards Shanann. The experts called him a family annihilator, someone who builds up a resentment and bitterness throughout time and then finally explodes. On the night of the incident, Shanann comes home and they end up having sex. However, in the morning, Chris wants to tell her the truth. So he wakes her up and starts to tell her all about the affair and everything that's happened. Obviously, at this news, Shanann gets upset and mad and starts to tell him that he's not going to see the children anymore. And at this point, Chris saw red and decided to strangle her on the bed. As he's strangling her, he looks over and sees the 2 girls are standing at the door. They start to ask what's wrong with Mummy, and he tells them to go back into their bedroom. Chris then wraps her up into a blanket and puts her into the back of a car. He puts the 2 children into the car and he drives 45 minutes to the drill site. When he gets there, he makes a shallow grave and buries Shanann's body in there. He then takes Bella out of the car, puts her blanket over her head and smothers her. He carries her up the stairs and dumps her into one of the tanks. He then comes back to the car where Bella's sitting and she asks him, "Are you going to do the same to me as you did to Cece?" He doesn't even say anything and he puts the blanket over her head and smothers her. He takes her up to the stairs and dumps her body in the second tank. Even in their death, he wouldn't even allow them to be together. After putting them both in the tank, he quietly gets into his car and drives to work. Chris will now spend the rest of his life in prison. He's in protective custody as none of the other inmates like him. It's hard to comprehend how anyone can do this to their wife, let alone their children. I still have a theory that Chris planned this as he wanted to run away with his new girlfriend. He knew Shanann would never leave the girls on their own, so the only way to be with his new girlfriend was to kill all his family. Let me know your comments below. It's hard to know what we can learn from the story as it came as such a shock to everyone. However, a scary fact that I learned was that 3 women per day are killed by their husband or ex-partner. If you know anyone that's in an abusive relationship or you are yourself, please seek help. I'll leave some numbers below for everyone. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.
You call me a saint, but you know I'm a stranger, all willing and able.